You are listening to the People Centric podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do. Hello, people-centric leaders. Today, we are talking about big emotions at work. And I'm just going to say that this topic came about because I was having a big emotion at work. This was a while ago. It was like last year sometime. But I was feeling, I'm going to say the word angry. I was feeling very mad about something. I was frustrated. I couldn't find the solution that I wanted to find, and I was frustrated about it. And I was holding that feeling in because I didn't think it was super appropriate to bring anger or frustration into work. And so I was trying to figure out how to spin that into a positive or change that to an opportunity. And I just couldn't. I was stuck in my mad and I couldn't figure that out. And so I decided maybe this time it is okay if I appropriately use my anger and my frustration, which is what I ended up doing. But I thought it would be a good topic for us to talk about. When is it appropriate to use emotions that are generally conceived as negative in the workplace? So that's what we're talking about today. Today with us, I have Philip Herzog. Philip, how are you doing today?
I am well today. My emotional state is steady. But when this topic came up, our whole team, Stephanie and I and Diana, all of us responded very strongly because, yeah, sometimes we all have that feeling. I'm typically a positive person, but I like to be real and I like to be genuine. And there are some days where it's just not a great day, where there's a lot of life things going on that do impact you at work, right? So I'm very excited to talk about this with this great team.
Okay, good. Thank you. You are a very positive person. So it will be good to hear your perspective about negative emotions from such a positive human being. Stephanie, I feel like you're very real.
Oh
Not
man, why'd you have
positive.
to make me go after Philip?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Good thing no one's introducing me today. So, how do
Oh,
you feel about this topic? What got you excited about it?
yeah, I love it. I do. I think I would put myself maybe a little middle to like less positive end of the spectrum most days where I'm like, if I am feeling something, I generally say it, or I'm not a fan at all of like the toxic positivity. Like if somebody's like, well, look on the bright side, it could always be worse. And I'm like, ew, don't you dare say that to me ever again. And so yeah, I generally think that it's great to talk about your emotions. And, I think what we're going to talk about today is like there is a more professional way to, I think, express big feelings or strong emotions at work. And it's really different than probably how you would express it to like a friend or partner or family member or something. So I'm super excited to talk about this because I wish we talked about this more in the workplace, because I think a lot of times it does just, workplaces tend to this toxic positivity and people start feeling like they can't ever be quote unquote negative or have bad emotions. And then a lot of people like shame themselves over that. It takes us to unhealthy places. So I'm super excited to talk about this. Let's rip off the Band-Aid and do it.
Yeah, let's do it. You already touched on a topic that I think we should start with, and that is the concept of toxic positivity that we have seen in workplaces. Do one of you want to touch on that a little bit more and give some examples about where we see that and what that does?
Yeah. So I think toxic positivity is the root of it is you're invalidating someone's experience, right? That's why toxic positivity feels wrong and why it's toxic positivity. Because, right, like we talk about you, Philip, and like you are an extremely positive person. You have positivity in your top strengths, and it's a true gift, right? And so how it becomes toxic is if you're using your positivity or positive language, let's say positive language, to really invalidate someone's experiences or make an excuse for why something is the way it is. Like you heard me give an example of like people like, oh, well, it could always be worse. When somebody expresses a frustration that's going on in their life. Or yeah, just focus on the positive and the bright side. And like sometimes there aren't bright sides. Like sometimes life is just like terrible, right? And things are really hard. Or this one I know is very controversial, but like the everything happens for a reason mantra. Like I know a lot of people have belief that's attached to that, but if it's not said in the appropriate setting in the appropriate way, or the person doesn't believe maybe the same way that you do in like a spiritual sense, that can be super invalidating of their experience of like, well, then why did this happen? Right? Like, then what's the explanation for that? So it gets toxic because it doesn't feel like then you're trying to understand the person's emotions. You're just telling them not to have them. Don't have any negative feelings. You can only have positive feelings.
Yeah, I think the key there is invalidating the feeling, right? If I came to you and I said, man, I'm really mad about this thing and I hate that this is happening and it's causing all of these problems in my life, and you were like, well, it could be worse, I would be like, well, of course it could be worse, but I'm stuck in this now. What do you mean it could be worse? That's not helpful. Yeah. So I think that's sort of, we see that as, especially in businesses, we see that because managers say things like, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, right? And I love that. I love that concept, but it also kind of invalidates some of those bigger frustrating feelings, the things like anger, the things like sadness, the things like mourning. We don't do that at work because it's considered inappropriate. But what are some ways that we should start talking about how maybe these things are appropriate? What are some things that we could talk through that show here are some ways that they are appropriate?
Yeah, I know we talk in our team sometimes the concept of like life is built around weddings and funerals, right? And again, I know this isn't the cheeriest thought sometimes because some of you are like, ooh, the wedding part, all the celebration. And then when I say funerals, you're like, oh, I don't like that. But I think it's acknowledging that like we do live in a world and we are human beings that have finite lives. And so there are often moments of big celebration and often moments of big grief. And I think if you can even frame and think about your business in that way and your team, there are going to be moments where you should celebrate big. You should have the blow up party. You should congratulate each other, pat each other on the back, buy the cake and cupcakes and bring them in, do all that. And I think people are more quick to do that. They're less quick to have like what we call the funeral moments. Like, what if we launched a new product or service line and it totally failed? What if we hired the wrong person and it ended up costing us a lot of like financial and emotional pain, or that somebody takes advantage of us in the marketplace? Like there's lots of things that happen, and I think it's important to equally celebrate both, and you can do that in some interesting ways, I think. And I think one moment of like grief that always comes to mind is we had one client who they had a situation where they hired the wrong person, and it ended up costing them time and money, and it burnt some relational bridges in and outside of their company, and they'd never really talked about it. And so it happened right before we started working with them. And so then once we came together, at one point we were just like, guys, like we think you actually need to grieve this, because nobody had really moved on from it, and it kept coming up in their working ways, and they would say, we're going to do this or not do this based on those emotions that were still there. And so we literally did just have like, we brought everybody in a room and had a collective moment of like, okay, everybody, like air the grievances, let's get this out, let's talk about why this hurt, let's talk about why it was hard, and then let's like all agree and have a moment where we're like, okay, we're not going to do that again, and we've learned from this.
I love that. Yeah.
I love that too. Yes. Well, I was thinking, one example, even on our own team, there was a meeting at the start of the year. There was a meeting a day after, like, just an anniversary date of me losing someone important to me in my life. So it was a personal loss, right? And so, as much as I love positive, also being like, yeah, you need to really get in it with people. And it was in the middle of a meeting. We were presenting to a board. Don and I were on this meeting together, and nothing terrible happened, but I was not on my A game. And in the middle of the meeting, and this has not happened in 10 years. It's been 10 years, but there was just this moment where I was like, what in the world is happening? I just like was gone. I was still present, but I was like, this is bizarre. This doesn't happen. This is not professional. So again, got through the meeting, did the thing. Clients didn't notice anything, but it wasn't like normal. So at the end too, just in terms of a manager standpoint, like to Diana's point, Don was awesome. Like he didn't say anything at first, and I was like, that meeting did not go the way I wanted it to. Thanks for jumping in and helping. That was really strange. And candidly, almost through tears, I was like, I am just like very much in grief right now. I don't know what's going on. This is very strange. And so I think that's a thing with lots of, whether it's personal, whether it's business, to your point, Stephanie, there's the cliche we hear all the time, keep your work at work and keep your home at home. But we often talk about the integration, like both impact you, and I think they should. But to be able to be humans with each other, it doesn't mean you get a therapy couch out every day either, right? As an empathizer, I know that that could be some people's fear of hearing that and saying, like, what do we do? But leaning in with your team and really acknowledging that, like whether it's a professional loss or a personal loss, if what you hear when you come back to work or back at the end of a meeting is just, well, it is what it is. I don't think there's growth from that, right? Like that's not how a team grows. And so I think one of the measures of teams we meet is when they like enough about what's going on with the person professionally, and then the organization's highs and lows. Like if you're unified and celebrating or grieving those, that adds to a really strong team dynamic as well.
Yeah, you said something that I think is really important. You said vulnerability. And that's something that maybe we're kind of talking about at work a little bit more since, I don't know, the pandemic or since the younger generation is in the workforce. I don't know. We're talking about it a little bit more in the context of good leaders. But I think it's true that you, in that moment, Philip, you had great vulnerability and said, listen, that didn't go the way that I wanted it to. And here's why. And Don, to his credit, had great vulnerability too and was like, that's okay. It's okay. I get it, right? I'm a human. I have emotions too. Things happen to me. How can we make sure that we do that better next time? Is there something that I can do to help you? What should we do? And I think a lot of leaders are afraid of vulnerability, either receiving it or giving it, right? They're afraid of both of those sides of vulnerability. And they're afraid of these bigger emotions. They're afraid of things like fear. They're afraid of sadness. They're afraid of mourning and loss. They're afraid of anger. And I think there's a place for all of those things if we do it really well. And to your credit, Philip, you did that specific example really well. You did that well. And so I kind of wonder, what are you guys, do you guys think that some of those emotions are appropriate and some are not? How do you put it in there and how do you not? What do we do around all of these? Because we're going to have them, right? I think that's the key. We're humans and we're going to have them.
Right, right. And I think I'm so glad you asked that question, Diana, because I was kind of thinking that as we were talking. I think, if I'm on the outside looking in on this, you're like, well, of course you're going to be sympathetic to somebody. And of course you're going to do that. And I think sometimes we don't in the moment. And we have to be honest about that. Sometimes we miss people and we miss the moment. And also to the point that was made earlier, like, you're not going to pull out the therapy couch for everything. And I know there's somebody here listening. They're like, it's not my job as the company to listen to everyone's personal problems, right? This is work. Let work be work. And I think that's part of the line too of that integration of like, well, we are human beings first, and then we are human beings at work. And so I think the one that I hear a lot, and that's harder for people, is I think people just miss the grief or regret. I think we just miss that emotional lot. So I'm glad we started with that one. But I think the one we hear a lot is like, well, this person just came in and freaked out. Like they were either angry or they were panicking. And how do you correctly express like panic or freak out or anger at work? And if you're a leader and somebody comes and they're like, like the moment happens and they crack, you broke them. How should we respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great, or even the like yeller, right? There's people who under tension will start to raise their voice higher and higher and just louder and louder.
And it starts getting to the squeaky voice.
Yeah, the squeaky voice or the even the like really red. I've seen people in meetings get totally red and they're just like mad. They're mad with anger. Seen people in meetings, felt it myself, whatever. I've been there, done that, right? But I think leaders shy away from that because they're like, whoa, I don't want to make them more mad. But what do you do in those moments?
Yeah, I love that last week we talked about conflict. I think that's one of one of the points when if a lot of strong emotions will come up, it probably comes up in three specific areas. One where there's conflict that could come from different spots. When you feel like a project or something incredibly important to you is on the line, right? And then I think to why we start out with vulnerability, it's also just when something's really vulnerable. So if you feel like a project is about to fail, and it's going to look like you're the one that messed up and it's your fault, you'll take that really personally. Or your client is about to lose something because of another department, heaven forbid, like, no, my client is on the line. I think there's lots of things that tie our identity or our ego or whatever that is to when the stakes just feel higher. And so one of the keys we talked about was just stopping and be like, am I okay? Like step one, am I okay? Before I go in, whatever emotional state I'm in, like what's going on here? Kind of check yourself for a second. And that doesn't mean you don't lean in and have a conversation. So if you're a manager or a leader and someone comes to you, clearly not okay, kind of freaking out, you can pause long enough to think, okay, like where are we at here? I mean, I always wonder, a lot of strong emotions expressed at work typically aren't just one thing, right? It's not like there's this one thing that sets someone off. They've probably built for a really long time because we're not really good at addressing things at the appropriate time. So typically you're like, there's probably a lot more to unpack. And so it's not just one conversation, and sometimes pausing and circling back later when you both have a better ability to communicate is a good next step.
Oh, good one. Yeah, because people, when they're in that heightened emotional state, they're not thinking rationally. And that's not a judgment. That is brain science. That is what is happening. And you're right, taking a moment to make sure that you're okay and, that you're in a space to have the conversation. And then validating the feelings of the other person and just saying, like, hey, you seem really mad, or you seem really sad, or you seem really frustrated. How can we talk about this? Or do you want to take a break? I love the check-in, the pause, and then the questions begin. How do we move forward? Are you ready to move forward? What does that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the pause because like if I think back to like younger Stephanie in the workplace or college Stephanie in college, I was like, I can vividly remember one moment. Like it was one of the college jobs I worked where I had said, okay, I won't work this day. I had something going on with my family that was really important to me. I couldn't miss. And then I got the work schedule and they had scheduled me for that day. So of course my brain immediately starts writing a story like they did that intentionally and they're not letting me take time off and they're letting somebody else do that because I could see the whole schedule for everybody and other people had off and I didn't. And I was mad. And so I remember going to my manager and I mean, I think I was red in the face. I don't have a good poker face. I've got very expressive eyebrows. So it was just like, you could tell I was pissed and went to them and I was like, I will not be working this day and I will not be coming in and you should have done this and da, 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 da. And then I just like turned around and I walked away.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. I'm not proud of this moment, but this happened. And my manager then was like, okay. And I got a message from him later, like, yeah, Stephanie, you can have that day off. That's fine. I think he worked around the schedule. And he said to me later, he goes, that was terrifying. Like, and I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you couldn't see how your face looked. And I don't think you were hearing your tone. Like, you were angry, angry. And so again, it was like, I look back and was I effective? I mean, kind of, yeah, let's be honest. Like, I got the day
not the
off.
day. Yeah, it worked.
But like, did I build the reputation that I wanted? Did I build relationship with my coworkers? And now, again, luckily for me, this was like a summer job in college. So it wasn't when my career had started yet. But like that's not how I want to be remembered. That's not how I want to show up. Like I look back on that story and I'm super embarrassed because had I taken a beat, like had I taken the pause and at least just waited until I like came down and I was like less like shaky in my body. like
Yeah.
full of rage, I probably would have handled it much differently. And I think still could have gotten the same results because I think my manager was willing to work around it. And if I look back in retrospect, I think he forgot.
Yeah.
And I mean, brutalized him over it. So,
And I think you kind of touched on the other point, right? There's the pause, there's the validating of those feelings. And then I think a really important part is the reflection on how you want to react and interact, how you want to be seen. And I think people forget that we are how we react. No one's going to remember what happened to make you react a certain way, but everyone will remember how you reacted. And so I think it is important if you want to come off a certain way and you want to be seen a certain way and you want to hold your own personal values to take a minute and think about how you react in those moments. Yeah.
oh, definitely. Because I look back and again, why that story is so mortifying is because like I so did not act within like the values that I hold now as an adult. But looking back, like 19-year-old, 20-year-old Stephanie was a little more hot-headed than I am today. And yeah, just like I took that big feeling and I just shoved it in someone else's face instead of coming to them and being like, hey, like, I'm feeling upset because I did ask for this and it was a really important family function. And like, I don't want to like just no show for you, be like, I can't miss this thing. And I think I could have had a really reasonable conversation and still express that I was upset by what happened without like blowing up in my manager's face. Or I think what I really looked like in that moment, if I could draw back, I think you guys have all seen the movie, like the Pixar Inside Out and the little angry man. I think that's what I looked like in that moment, where you're just like, he's this little like flame throwy, angry guy. And that was me in that moment. And if you've seen that movie, that anger does things that we regret and is not effective and it's not within our values.
I think he's the only character that also wears a shirt with a collar on it. I mean, he's dressed like he's ready to go to the office. I don't think
You're
that's
right.
accidental.
Oh my gosh, he's mad at work. He's mad at corporate life. And who
That's
can
right.
blame?
He just needs a more alignment and empowerment. He is probably disengaged on the way to toxic because of what he's experienced or not experienced positively. Yeah, no, that's funny.
Agreed. Well, I love this conversation. I love that we have said we're humans at work. We're doing this thing. We are making sure that we are validating those feelings. Are there any other like big things that we would say about negative emotions at work?
I would probably just add in like a final closing thought. I think that a lot of the time, people in leadership, I love Diana how you brought up the reaction part. I've heard some people in leadership before say, well, they might minimize some strong reaction. If it's like they just blew up, they lost their cool, yada, yada, yada. And I think that one of the things when people respond with strong emotion, I think it's usually when they feel like there's control missing or they don't have all the information. So especially as someone who is in leadership, like two good questions always to ask yourself are probably like one, how much information does the person have? To Stephanie's story, it's a great example. She jumped the gun and she didn't behave in the way like she said. That's not a great response. So like what information is missing? What did they not know for assuming good intent? And then second, I would also think, have I modeled as a leader that this reaction gets results? Because if blow up culture is becoming a thing in your organization, it's probably not an isolated event. Like if that's allowed to keep happening, it's a good thing that a manager goes and has a coaching conversation afterward. Like, hey, we can work through this, but there are some limits. Like, let's not do this. Check in and listen, but also setting a really clear tone for what you want your culture to look like. Both very important things to consider.
Oh man, I feel like you just touched on things that we could do whole entire other podcasts on. The assigning intent, huge, like make sure that you're not assigning intent to other people's actions. You don't know what their intent is unless you ask them. That's one of my favorite topics we could do. We have done a whole other podcast on that. It's way back in the beginning of these. And then you also said like make sure that this is done appropriately, right? What big emotions do is they make you not think logically. That's why that beat is important. That's why, you know, thinking through and deciding how you want to react is important. But if it is happening over and over and over again in your company, there's something else going on, right? You've allowed this to happen. The culture is making this weird space for people. But yeah, you're right. You need to reel that in, reel that in. We don't want anybody to feel unsafe, even when there's big emotions. So I think that I wanted to make sure we were talking about there is a line. There's always a line, and your people do need to feel safe. And so if there's emotions big enough that people are worried about either you or themselves, it's probably too far. So, yeah. Is there any other thing? You just dropped a bunch of knowledge bombs on us, Philip. Is there anything else we should talk about
That was
before?
it, right? Stay tuned, people centric people. More to come. Yeah, no.
Love it. Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. If you want to reach out to us, if you have more questions about this topic, things we didn't discuss, things you want to hear about, reach out. You can listen to the outro to get a hold of us, but we will be here and hopefully you will hear us again next time. Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to the People Centric podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead well.